It's Tuesday. It's the busiest teaching day of the last week of Jesus' life. Today he goes into the temple and spends a lot of time there with the leaders of the Jewish people. And then he's going to go outside of the city for a little while at the end of the day and speak to his disciples. I want to talk this morning about some of his interaction with the religious leaders in the temple. In Matthew 22, Jesus is telling a parable. It's one of his most common teaching tools. Sometimes maybe we think of parables as kind of these cute stories of, here's it's kind of a metaphor. There's a sheep, and the sheep is kind of like whatever, and it's kind of cute. Parables are actually extraordinarily provocative statements or teachings that Jesus offers. And if you read the Gospels, one of the things that you're going to see is every time Jesus tells a parable, the audience, the actual people he's speaking to, react really strongly to it because they're very powerful messages wrapped up in these parables. In Matthew 22, Jesus tells a parable that we usually call the parable of the wedding feast. And in this parable, there's a king, and the king is ready to have this great wedding feast that he's apparently been planning. And so he sends out his servants to those people who should already be planning on coming to the wedding feast. He sends them out, and those people who should be who are invited, they all say no for various reasons. Some of them even capture some of those servants and mistreat them. And the king is enraged by this. He declares that those people aren't worth coming to his banquet. They didn't deserve to come to his banquet. And so he sends out others to destroy those people, ultimately burns their city to the ground. And then the king sends out another batch of servants. And he says, go see who you can find. He sends them out essentially to the riffraff of the city. The Bible says both the good and the bad. Essentially anybody that wants to come to this banquet is invited to come and join the banquet. And as the banquet starts, the king is coming into the banquet hall, and he sees a man sitting there, and this man's not dressed for a wedding, the Bible says. And the king goes up to this man and says, friend, what are you doing? And it says this guy is speechless. He's utterly confused. Apparently he thinks that his merits, his pedigree, his name, these kinds of things mean he's invited. But he's underdressed. He's not taking it seriously. And so the king sends this guy out, the Bible says, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now this is a serious slap in the face, this parable, to the religious leaders, the religious insiders that Jesus is talking to at the temple, right? These are the ones that they all expect to be the first ones invited into the kingdom of heaven. But what Jesus is doing here is kind of low-key telling them, you don't have a chance. So the question is, who's in and who's out? And that's the question people always ultimately want to ask people like myself and others who work in the pastoral ministry is, am I in or am I out? And there's really only one way to answer that question from the Gospels. And the answer is your heart. Because here's the thing, we can't fool God. Right? He's not impressed by our church attendance. He's not impressed by how nicely we dress when we go to church or by our fluency in Christianese. He's not impressed when we throw money around here and there. None of those things. None of those things can punch a ticket to God's great wedding feast. But what he is impressed by is people's hearts. Now, some of those people are good people, church-going folks. But some of those people are bad people. Jesus himself, in telling his parables, the words that he says are the good and the bad. There'll be all kinds of perhaps what we might consider unsavory characters invited to the great feast of Jesus, because it's not about how Christian-y you look on the outside. Jesus says it's about, do you really want to come? Do you really want to be a part of this kingdom that God is creating for us? And so according to the Gospels, it comes down to really one question. And that question is, do you know that you desperately need the grace of Jesus? And if so, then all those other Christian-y things that we do, they just further solidify our place at the table at this banquet. But if not, then there is no amount of tithing, no amount of Bible reading, no amount of going to church, no amount of any of those things that can amount to anything at all. And what's more, according to this parable, you're likely to end up being that guy who shows up at the banquet thinking he's in, and then later is baffled by the fact that the master says, no, you never took it seriously. You can't just sneak in because of who you are, because of your religious pedigree, because of your experience. You can't do any of those things. So Jesus says it's actually dangerous to be those people who think that our Christianness can do anything for us. So may you find this Holy Week that you are aware of your desperate need for the grace of Jesus. And with so much of the trappings and the routine of our Christian lives now being stripped away from us in this kind of strange time that we're in, may we all use this time to learn to ever more fully rely on the constant, wide open love that Jesus has for every single daughter and son that he's created.